Hi, Glenn Frost. Obama built up a huge bank account during the campaign. Is he allowed to use that in any particular way for both domestic or foreign policy activities, either on behalf of his party or himself?
You mean literally a bank account?
The money he raised during his campaign.
That's an interesting technical question. I'm not sure I have the answer to that. I believe that they spent so much money at the end of his campaign. I mean, they were literally bombarding the American people with ads. They were outspending McCain by massive amounts. I remember at the time that they were really trying to spend down everything they had raised. I don't know the technical answer to the question, but I don't think it matters in the sense that Obama has shown that he has incredible fundraising chops, and I'm sure he would be even more successful now at raising funds than he was a year ago. So I think one of the reasons why the Republicans are in such trouble, at least on the presidential, well, on both the congressional and the presidential sides of things, but on the presidential side, is that you face a highly intelligent president with very high approval ratings, with a very steady governing temperament, who is less likely than a normal president to make lots of mistakes. He's not going to get everything right, but he's not going to be impulsive and get things wrong, with a huge fan base of Obama maniacs who are desperate to contribute in any way that they can, who are logged on to various networking sites and internet communities that the Obama team is going to manipulate in order to send messages to congressmen and to the media and to the public, and who, I'm sure, would be prepared to donate in the future. So I think the fundraising side, whether he has anything left in the bank or not, is going to continue to be a huge strength for Obama.
It's Michael. Thanks. Terrific talk. Pragmatism, ambition, liberalism, and the last point was diplomacy.
Yep.
No mention of militarism, and I guess from the last point you mentioned, it's likely to take somewhat of a back seat. But the forces in the United States that have underlined militarism as an aspect of their international affairs are very deep-seated. How do you think that's playing out? I guess the role of the Pentagon, the political military complex issues. How do you think this is going to play out?
Well, it might be more complicated than you suggest, in the sense that, for example, the Defence Secretary Bob Gates, who's a holdover from the Bush administration, proposed a defence budget which was much less concerned, for example, than Australia's own defence white paper, if you believe what's in the paper, about hedging against China. You've got a Defence Secretary who has spoken openly about getting the military out of certain tasks that they're doing at the moment and handing it over to the State Department, who's offered to hand over part of his budget to the State Department. So although it's true that the military was more front and centre under the Bush administration, I don't think that it's fair to say that there's a sort of a monolithic military-industrial complex in the United States that believes that is to the good. Quite the opposite. I mean, most of the military officers that I spoke to in Washington were, very intelligent and realistic and pragmatic, and realised that many of these issues should be led by diplomats in the first instance. Secondly, what we've seen about Obama and force is that he's prepared to use it, and he passed that first test, and he ticked that box of freeing that captain, that merchant captain. So he's not a pacifist. He's prepared to use force. He promised during the campaign that he would continue to do that in Pakistan, and he's done it. But I think he is going to be a very cautious commander-in-chief for two reasons. One is he has something, well, in excess now of 200,000 troops deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he has to focus on drawing down in Iraq without squandering the progress that's been made and trying to tamp down the most recent upshoots of sectarian violence. And on Afghanistan, he has to square his promise to elevate Afghanistan to prominence with the pessimism you find both in America and in particular in Europe with his ability to actually win there. So he's constrained by these two extremely complicated, difficult fights that he's in. And secondly, I think his instincts are pushing towards diplomacy as well. Lots of his comments have been about rebalancing American policy. So for all those reasons, because I don't think the military-industrial complex is as monolithic as some people do, and because I think there's a general recognition that America's got to move back in that direction, because that accords with Obama's instincts, and because he doesn't have much choice, because Bush has left him with these other two conflicts, I think diplomacy will remain at the centre of things. Of course, who knows what happens tomorrow? And, there can be blindside events and there could be an attack on the United States which changes, for example, which changes the dynamic. But at the moment, you would predict a very cautious commander-in-chief.
Thanks, Michael. Alan Gingell from the Institute. The dominant event of Obama's presidency so far has been the global economic crisis. What lessons do you draw for the way he looks at and will handle the world from the way he's dealt with that crisis? I'm thinking both at an institutional level and from his ideas about the US's role in the global economy.
I think there's a few things to say. One is that he's been deliberate and measured and sort of staged in his approach, it seems to me, on the domestic global financial crisis. And that's very much of a piece with his style of governing more generally. He is not quick to respond to things always, or quick to anger, and you saw his policy roll out in different elements, the winning of the further bailout money from the Congress, the stimulus account, the toxic asset issue, the housing market, the credit market. So there's been a deliberateness to the way he's conducted himself. Secondly, in terms of institutions, you have certainly seen a willingness to innovate. Surely the crisis has called time on the G8. Surely it has ushered in this new institution of the G20. So I think he's very willing to do that, and he's also, you've seen, willing to compromise with different leaders on the global economic crisis in ways that are quite striking. So, and finally, you've seen this element that I mentioned in my speech about a willingness to acknowledge that America is only one player among many. Now, one difference between the economic situation and the broader foreign policy agenda is that America's dominance is clearer in terms of military power and security than it is in economics. I mean, we do live in a multilateral global economy, a multipolar global economy. We don't really live in a multipolar world in a security sense. The United States still spends 50% of the world's military expenditures. It's still unique in being able to project power almost anywhere it wants to. So there are probably some limits to the analogy, but certainly a willingness to innovate in terms of institutions, a willingness to compromise will probably be common to both.
Tony Dowling, radiologist. Is there any hope in America for, one, gun control legislation, and two, universal health scheme like Medicare?
Well, I mean, the signs were not good on the gun control issue, as I mentioned, when he said that we will not even take the fight up to Congress on the assault weapons ban. And that's kind of like the pointy issue of gun control. I mean, if you can't get a ban on assault weapons through, then why is it, why are we trying? So that was troubling. And I have to say also on the universal healthcare issue, that is a huge fight that's ahead of him. He has signalled that he wants to achieve universal healthcare. So you see that theme of ambition that I mentioned, where he's talked about very ambitious goals he's put very ambitious figures in his budget. But he is going to face the mother of all fights in the Congress. I mean, you wait till the lobbyists get their teeth into all those different congressmen and all those different questions of healthcare reform. So I have to say I'm not particularly hopeful on either of those two questions, but both of them will give us a better fix on this question that I ended with, and that is, how tough is Obama prepared to play things? I mean, he is in a dominant position, and the Republicans have just suffered an awful loss in this defection of Arlen Specter. So if he's going to play his cards, this is the time to do it. This is the time to be brutal and to really attempt to dominate them and to really throw your weight around. But what we've seen on both the climate change issue and the healthcare issue is a willingness to allow Congress to take the lead so far and to work with allies, senior Democratic chieftains in the Congress, like Waxman on climate change, to allow them to first of all start things off. I would like to see him be more forward-leaning on those kinds of issues.
My name's Judy Betts. Could you tell me if you think that Obama might have the political will or the power to change the narrative around drugs, to revisit the whole issue about the war on drugs, and perhaps move toward a harm minimisation model?
You're stretching the limits of my Obama research here. Look, I think that is one of those questions that is so tied up with the American story and, as you say, the American narrative. You've seen in the last month or so problems in Mexico to do with drug issues, and you certainly haven't seen any signals from Obama that this is an indicate and that he would use this as a pretext or a launching pad to talk about the legalisation of drugs or the decriminalisation of drugs. Rather, you've seen a relatively strong response in terms of sending more assistance to the Mexican government and putting more resources into closing the border. So I wouldn't want to go out too far on a limb because it could be chopped off. But I think I think that is a very difficult issue to tackle. B, he already faces the most intimidatingly crowded agendas at the domestic and foreign level. That is he going to pick a fight on that one? I suspect not.
Thank you. Jeff Gray. Michael, I was just wondering what you would describe as the pluses and minuses for Australia and for Kevin Rudd out of the first 100 days. I mean, we're committing more troops to Afghanistan, Pakistan's imploding, we've caught the global financial crisis. Just wondered what your list of pluses and minuses would be.
Well, most of those sound like minuses. Most of them are minuses. I mean, the situation in Pakistan is, looks and feels like a bit of a downward spiral. We don't know. I mean, I think myself that Obama is right to try to redefine victory in Afghanistan and have a crack at winning it. I think it is right. The whole world agrees that the conflict in Afghanistan was a just one, and the world and international institutions have committed to it, and so I think we need to persevere and try to win it. But I don't think anybody knows whether the policies that he's announced in Afghanistan, the fruits of the policy review, the mini-surge of the 21,000 troops, the 5,000 troops that the Europeans have promised, although they've also said that they're going to pull 3,000 of those out after August. I don't think many people know what that's going to lead to in terms of an end state. So none of these aren't Obama's. These things are not due to Obama's mistakes or his sins. This is the agenda that he inherited from his predecessor, and it's a difficult agenda for the United States and for its allies. But in terms of the relationship between Obama and Rudd, and between the United States under the Obama administration and Australia under the Rudd government, I think most of the balance is on the plus side. I think the plus sides are you have a president who listens to advice, who is deliberate and measured in the way he responds to crises. You have a president who wants to take action, for example, on issues like climate change that I think affect Australia's core national interests. You have an administration that is in sync with the Australian government, unlike, for example, the situation in Britain, another very close alliance where it appears that the political systems are likely to be out of sync, that the Tories will probably be re-elected soon, and you'll then have different kinds of governments in each country. In our alliance, the political systems are kind of in sync. So those are all the positive sides, and I think there's something of a rapport that's developed between Obama and Rudd. I think on the negative side, and I may have said this here before, because Obama is so internationally popular and because he's such a figure of fascination, our relative position in the mindset of the Americans may well be different. And we are going to have to fight in a very tough and very intelligent way to try to maintain our access and our level of influence in Washington, because everybody is going to be reaching out to Obama. And Obama doesn't have particularly strong links to Australia, and he's not even particularly wedded to Cold War era alliances. So some of the struts that we've used to try to bolster our position in Washington in the past are not going to work. So pluses and minuses, I still think the pluses outweigh the negatives, but there is a defect to the quality of Obama, and that is his international popularity and where that leaves us in the minds of the Americans. Tony Pooley.
Michael, you mentioned the small, but I would suggest significant steps that Obama's taken in relation to American relations with Cuba. Yep. The transfer of money, the relaxation of travel concessions. I'm wondering if there was an element to that which played to the large domestic Cuban community in Florida, and or whether this is, steps towards perhaps relaxation of the trade embargo. Can you foresee Raul Castro and Barack Obama ever meeting? That's the question.
Look, I actually think this is a good news story, and one that has not been driven by domestic politics. The US approach to Cuba is insane. I mean, it's insane to maintain these sorts of restrictions against this tiny, weird holdout communist country just off your borders. I mean, is the regime in Cuba attractive? No, it's deeply unattractive. Are the Castros great revolutionary heroes? No. They're despots who are mainly interested in their own survival and that of their regime. They abuse the human rights and the political freedoms of Cubans and so on. But locking yourself off from it and freezing yourself out from it is not an intelligent way to deal with another state, and it's not an intelligent way of influencing the nature of the regime. So I don't think domestic electoral politics in Florida in particular forced this. I think rather it was electoral politics in Florida that prevented what is basically a complete consensus amongst US foreign policy professionals that the policy had failed from ever being unfrozen. So now we see a thaw. Raul Castro responded to that and said everything is on the table. Of course, he doesn't really mean that, but at least he said it. You've still got a long way before they're smoking cigars together. But I think these are positive steps, and they're fact-based, reality-based, evidence-based foreign policy steps, and that's a good thing.
Hugh Wyndham. I'd agree completely with what you said about Obama and Cuba, but I'd throw a couple more countries into the same basket in a sense. I think his handshake with Hugo Chavez was in the same mould, because Chavez is taking his lead from the Castros, and in some ways his overture to Iran also, because one of the things that those three regimes have traded on is the hostility of the United States, and by offering a gesture he's thrown confusion into their capitals. But he has a way of having a sting in the tail, though, because the book that Chavez gave him was originally published about 25 years ago. I mean, it wasn't anything new. And he was asked about it, Obama was asked about it shortly after having received it. And he said, "Oh, I thought Chavez was giving me a book that he'd written. I was going to give him one of mine."
I don't have anything to add to that. He does write a good book, though, Obama. He does write a good book, and I think he's writing a pretty good book on foreign policy too. Thank you.